Hello, can everyone hear me? Welcome to today's conversation on African Elections Watch 2020.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Dr. Akakpo, can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Fantastic. Once again, welcome to all and sundry on the call. My name is Cherk Klutse, and I'm the programs lead at the Institute of International Affairs, Ghana. Today's conversation, like we said, is going to be on African elections through the prism of ECOWAS. And to help me dissect the conversation, I have two very distinguished fellows on the call. And we have Dr. Marc Akakpo, who's a professor of political science at Kennesaw State University, and Dr. Festus Aubyn, who's a research fellow at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. So if you permit me, please, I'll go through a brief conversation setup to set the pace for the conversation today. I'll go through a few slides, and then we can get directly into the conversation, please. So, to start the conversation off, I think we all know that this year is a very, very busy year. And these are the panelists for the show. If you can see my screen, Dr. Marc Akakpo, like I said, is a professor of political science at Kennesaw State University. And he recently, very, very recently graduated with a top honors in international conflict management from Kennesaw State University. His research interests include global governance, politics, political economy in Francophone Africa, and he teaches a variety of courses related to global political economy. His expertise are quite varied. They include journalism, communication, and mediation and policy evaluation. He is Dr. Marc Akakpo, one of our panelists for today. Our co-panelist for today is Dr. Festus Aubyn, who is a research fellow at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. He was awarded the best PhD from the University of Ibadan quite a number of years ago. His research focus is on African peace and security, with a particular interest in the UN, AU, and ECOWAS peace operations. He is an astute expert in the terms of, he has a large number of publications to his name. He has participated in and presented papers in a number of local and international conferences. These are our panelists for today, and I know I cannot hear you, but please put your hands together for our panelists. Now, to set the tone for the conversation, today's conversation is on elections in ECOWAS. So elections matter. Elections in ECOWAS matter because they affect a wide array of topical global issues, from global peace and security, migration, global health, among others. And this year, 13 countries in ECOWAS, 13 countries in Africa, pardon me, are going to the polls or have been to the polls. It is nice to note that right now, there's an election going on in Ivory Coast amid a few controversies, but an election is ongoing. A few of the factors that draws this conversation into perspective, if my team could switch to the next slide, is this. This is the timeline for elections in Africa for the year 2020. Ethiopia has postponed years, Somalia has postponed years, and currently today, October 31st, Ivory Coast is in an election. Now, why does this matter? 2020, a disruptor of this 2020 year has been COVID. These are a few COVID numbers as it stands now. And the question that we are going to pose is, should elections be even taking place amid COVID-19 deaths and cases rising on the continent? And of course, a key topic that we'll be diving into is the Islamic insurgency going on in West Africa, which is one of our topical issues for today. Some of the countries in West Africa are very fragile at the moment, with a lot of insecurity, a lot of topical military issues going on, and this will diverge into later on in the conversation. Yes, and this ties into the security bit, which is the peace index. So I will share this presentation after the call with everyone who's on this call, and this sets into perspective what the trend is and what the rank is for global peace index for the countries that are having elections this year. And another thing is that the youth bulge of Africa. Africa is the most youthful population in the world, but the median age for the top two contenders in all these 13 elections is 66 years. It presents quite a significant development for us as a youth, and we would like to dissect this further. And of course, the prism in which we're having this conversation is ECOWAS elections. So I will quickly pause here, take an opening comment from Dr. Jean-Marc Akakpo, then we can dive into the conversation.
Thank you very much for that brilliant introductions. The data that you show actually convey exactly the concern of the international community when you come to elections. And I just want to say to begin with, I want to say hi to my colleague, my boss, Festus Aubyn. We worked together at Kofi Annan Center last year. I'm glad that you're here. But also, I want to say that when it comes to question in terms of an election this year, it's not only West Africa, it's the whole Africa and also the global world. The US is having its election in 3 days, and the challenges are the same. I'm not comparing US to West African challenges in terms of governance and all that, but we have to actually remind ourselves that election is election and the challenges here. So I'm actually glad to share my little knowledge as a political scientist. I have been teaching political science since 2013. And as you say, I have done a lot of research in Western Africa. West Africa is actually the focus of my research in terms of global governance, political economy, and international conflict management. So I'm glad to be here, and let's just start it and see what we can actually discover today. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Akakpo, for the brief comments. Dr. Festus, if you could please give us your initial comments, sir.
Yes. All right, good afternoon to everyone, and greetings also to Marc. It's been a very long time.
It's been a year.
Yes. Yeah, the topic for today, very timely and very important, also because of what is happening within the sub-region. I mean, like you rightly pointed out, Côte d'Ivoire is having elections today, and we know what has happened from the planning stage to today's elections. And some of the statistics and figures that you provide, especially with the age of the president who are, contesting these elections, and how, it also becomes interesting when we are linking it to COVID-19, because we know that the old folks are more vulnerable to COVID-19 than the young folks. So it also makes it quite interesting for we as Africans. So it's important, and I look forward to very interesting discussions and debates as we move to the issues proper. So I will pause here and then wait for the period where we will delve much deeper into the subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the brief comments. And without much ado, I would like to go into my first question. And my first question is this: should African countries be holding elections during this COVID-19 era? And I would throw it back to Dr. Aubyn, sir.
Okay, well, I think we need to do a disaggregation of the countries that are holding these elections and the COVID-19 statistics to be able to appreciate whether elections should hold or not. We can't have a blanket discussion on that. Every country has its own context. And like you rightly pointed out, some countries have been able to hold their elections irrespective of the repercussions with that. Others are also holding it now, as we are talking, and others are planning to hold it before the year ends. So basically, for me, I think it is the country's statistics or conditions that will help us determine whether elections should go on or not, and also the kind of measures that are put in place to make sure that people vote without endangering their lives. So we should look at it from this perspective. If the mechanisms have been put in place to facilitate voting within this period where we have a lot of restrictive measures, then I have no problems with that, because postponing elections has its own consequences as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it has its own consequences as well. And we need to be mindful of that. So if the country's condition makes it possible for them to hold elections, I have no, issues about that, provided the mechanisms have been put in place to ensure the safety and security of electoral officials, voters, the security agencies, and those who are helping to manage and to conduct those elections.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Aubyn. And if I could politely share my screen, I think we have the data points for the COVID figures in each of the 13 countries that are holding elections this year. So I would like to put that on the screen, so we are, like you said, we have a very specific conversation backed by data, not just a blanket statement. So if you could just please move to the next slide.
The next slide.
Yes, so these are the COVID numbers as it stands now. And then we are aware that Ethiopia has postponed their elections and Somalia has. So in Ivory Coast, there are 30,000 current cases. Total cases are 20,000. The current active cases are 194, and COVID deaths are 124. So just if everybody can see my screen, these are the data points for COVID by the numbers in the election. Dr. Akakpo, the same question to you, sir. Should African nations be holding elections during this trying COVID-19 times?
I find the question very interesting, and I can go both ways on it. First of all, I have a feeling, and I hope Dr. Aubyn will share this feeling with me, the only time African, the citizen of Africa, hear about politics or the government is during the elections. That's the only time. You look at African countries, the government presence, maybe if we can push the conversations, maybe by the presence of the police on the street. But the only time the government have a contact or politicians have a contact of the citizens is during elections. So election is very fundamental, it's pivotal to our democracy. Now, to look at it different way in terms of what kind of condition in which we should have elections and what are the precautions we need to take for people to protect their health. That's a very fundamental question, because first of all, if we want to do, ask people to send their ballot in, okay, can we count on the post office in the country? That's my first concern. Second, if you ask people to go and vote, would they respect social distancing? That's my second concern. So I think somehow, if, as Dr. Aubyn said, election is so pivotal to our democratic system, that's actually the only thing I see as democracy in Africa. I think it's no matter what, we need to take all the proper precaution and let people go and voice their voice.
Thank you. Quite an interesting position that elections are fundamental to our democracy. And just to take a sidestep, how has COVID-19 affected the cost of running elections? Are governments really spending as much as they would have spent on elections in the pre-COVID era? And Dr. Akakpo, if you can take this question from me, sir.
Okay. I think somehow, well, the cost of elections, when it comes to African countries, the first thing I see is the transportation, access to the poll. do generally government in Africa help populations to get to the poll, or population themselves have to do whatever it takes to get to the poll? So when it comes to the cost, I think I'm gonna say that I don't see how that's going to change anything about the election, because I don't see government actually providing transportation for citizens to go vote, because they can ask for their vote, but what they want is their vote. How do they vote? I don't think the government actually care about that, unless Dr. Aubyn proved me wrong.
Dr. Aubyn, I think he has asked the question for me, sir. Do you share the views of Dr. Akakpo?
Okay, I'll take it from this way. What has been the additions to what normally the election management bodies or government do in the absence of COVID-19? If we take the discussion from there, then we'll be able to determine whether the government has spent more vis-a-vis the previous elections. So let's take, for example, the electoral cycle. So let's come to registration, for example. Now, and I'll use Ghana as an example. I mean, the Electoral Commission had to employ people, had to buy sanitizers, has to buy face masks, has to provide water and whatever for people to wash their hands and all that. All those things come with a cost. All right. Now, during the election, similar things have to be added. You know, so the point I'm trying to make is that you will see that there have been additions to what the electoral management bodies usually do because of COVID-19 demands, all right, for the Electoral Commission, all right. But on the side of the political parties and government and all that, there are restrictions in terms of even campaigning and other things. So you could see that there too, maybe there are certain things that we used to do in the past when the pandemic was not there, which we are not doing now. So more or less, the reduction from this side can cater for the increase in demand from the COVID demands that has added to the election budget. You know, so if you look at it from both ways, you will see that maybe there has been a balancing effect with the addition of COVID-19 costs, and then the other restrictions that has also more or less reduced the cost of running elections in certain places. And that is the point where maybe Dr. Akakpo's point will come in, that really maybe nothing has changed in terms of cost. But I would want us to look at the budgets and the statistics to be able to have a more informed and concrete point.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aubyn. My next question would, I think you have preempted it. I was going to ask you that if the cost has gone up, if we are moving monies that could be used to fight COVID-19 into the coffers of the Electoral Commissions to hold the elections, wouldn't it be prudent if we just say, you know what, we as a nation know that we have an election coming up, but there's a pandemic. Let's move it 6 months. Let's move it 10 months. Wouldn't it be prudent for us to do that as a country, Dr. Aubyn?
It's a very interesting question. And I think such a question also demands an analysis of the situation that we find ourselves, especially, and I'm not talking in terms of only Ghana, but other West African region. What does the constitution of those countries say? Does the constitution allow it? Because you take the case of Cote d'Ivoire, for example, the present term is ending. When it ends, is there any provision in the constitution that talks about prolonging elections? So we look at the legal dimension and whether something can be done about that. If something can be done about that and the number of cases are rising in the country, and we think that organizing the election could affect people's health and all that, then why not? We can prolong it. But if the status quo, because people are going about their normal duties, right? Even when you go to the market, the malls and whatever, people are even acting as if there's no COVID-19, all right? So the country's context is very important, you know, and we can't have the same solution for each country. Every country has its own peculiarities, and that is what, for me, should inform whether we should postpone or not.
Dr. Aubyn, thank you very much. Dr. Akakpo, I wouldn't say I know what you say, but shouldn't African nations see the cost and say, you know what, let's move it 6 months?
I think I'm going to go by what Dr. Aubyn says. So the fundamental question we need to go back to is, okay, in terms of governance, what are the budget of a specific government of Africa? Do they have a public health budget? Do they have an election budget? What does the constitution say in terms of transition? So I think those are the questions we need to ask. So to take a specific case, we need to know what is the political culture of a specific country. If, for example, in Ivory Coast, the constitution stipulates clearly the transition in case of a pandemic, in case of this is what to be done, then when we look at the cost of the election because of the pandemic, then we can go and say, this is what the constitution said. Let's follow what the constitution said. But if, for example, in the constitution, there's nothing said, and the only thing people are looking for is that elections to feel like they live in a country, then we have an obligation to have the elections, right? Again, I'm going to go back to my point of, well, any government or every government should have a public health budget. I think if we have learned something during 2020 is that we have a lot of countries have neglected public health until now. We spend a lot of money on the military equipment. We spend a lot of money buying our vote, and we forget about public health. But now what the 2020 is saying is that people health matters, right? When people health matters, if people have to vote for you to be in power, then you need to think about their health. So clearly what I'm trying to say here is, depending on the country, if the country have taken the proper measure to actually be able to postpone the election without creating social problems, then it can be done. But if the election is the only way to actually get something done in the country, then we need to take a proper precaution and let people vote, and while respecting their health also.
Thank you, Dr. Akakpo. That is, I think if I'm getting my panelists right, it's important that we revisit our constitutional governance structures in our countries, and also, like Dr. Aubyn said, if the funds are available to be used for that, because there's a budget for elections in every country, then we should do it. But interesting point about the public health budget for each country. But I would like to pivot of the constitution and ask, Dr. Aubyn, is third termism coming to stay in ECOWAS?
I will answer the question directly. Okay. I think in 2015, ECOWAS tried to have this policy where it only allowed 2 terms in office. Whether the first term is 4 years, 5 years, or 6 years, it doesn't matter, but 2 terms in office. But we had 2 countries that boycotted that, Gambia and then Togo, because of the peculiar situation in those countries. And up till now, we've not had consensus on that. I remember in January 2020, during the ECOWAS, some ECOWAS discussion, the issue came up, and some members thought that we should look at term limit as a sovereign matter, not as a sub-regional matter. It should be left for countries to decide through referendum and whatever. Others also felt that it's not about how long you have stayed in power, but it should be about how you have performed in power. And you know, over the years, ECOWAS has struggled, to deal with this particular matter, especially when it's certain individuals are involved or certain political leaders are involved. I don't think it has come to stay. It is just a reversal of the positive strides that ECOWAS has had over the years. It is just a group of leaders who are taking advantage of their country's vulnerabilities and situations to prolong their tenure in office. I don't think in Ghana, for example, that will ever happen anytime soon. If any president wants to do that, the kind of public that we have in Ghana, I don't know how that will happen in Ghana. You go to other countries, Nigeria, Obasanjo, I remember before he left office, tried to, but he faced serious resistance. He did that. So it will depend on the country's situation and the level of democratic development and consolidation. So we may have isolated cases of these unconstitutional changes of government, but I don't think it is something that will be encouraged in the future, despite the fact that for me, I think ECOWAS has not been able to handle the case of Guinea, Alpha Conde, and also the case of Ouattara for whatever reasons, But I think looking at country-specific situations are quite important in answering your question about whether it has come to stay or not.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aubyn. Before I go to Dr. Akakpo, you talked about consensus, and I do know that the AU has a strong position on unconstitutional change of government, which is in Article 23 of the AU Charter on Good Governance, Democracy and Elections. And the last point under Article 23 is that constitutional amendments that allow incumbents to stay in power are also deemed as unconstitutional changes of government. This has been ratified and it has been in effect since 2012. So my question is that there is a consensus. Why are we not using the consensus here?
Okay, so that is the point that I made, that when it comes to these matters, it's always been a case of more or less countries talking about their sovereignty, that it should be a sovereign matter, it should be a constitutional matter. And that is why some countries use a referendum as a way of changing that. Where does the Constitution allows a referendum to be held to change the Constitution? If the Constitution allows and the sub-regional Constitution disallows that, that is where you have this dichotomy between national laws and then sub-regional laws. And when there is conflict, which one holds? And that is the similar situation we had in Rwanda when Paul Kagame did a referendum to extend his stay in power. So it's always been a very sensitive matter, and countries have most of the time approached this from a national perspective as to whether it is legal within their constitutional mandate. So I think moving forward, we need to reconcile what we sign at the sub-regional level or regional level as against what pertains at the national level, whether if we say 2 terms, the national laws should also reflect that, so that we don't have those discrepancies that states can exploit, or certain heads of state can exploit to continue to be in office. But I must also say that I think ECOWAS, the type of leaders that maybe we have now are also important when you are discussing these issues, because we saw what happened in Gambia with respect to how Yahya Jammeh's wanting to stay in power, which is also unconstitutional change of government, how they forced him out. In Togo, a similar thing happened. What happened? Togo, the president during that time was even the head of the chairman of ECOWAS. What happened? ECOWAS could only facilitate political discussions with him and the opposition groups. Nothing really happened. So I wasn't so surprised at what happened in Cote d'Ivoire and then Guinea-Bissau. But the point I'm making is that we need to reconcile the national laws and the sub-regional laws, so that there will not be any loopholes for president to exploit. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aubyn. I would reserve my follow-up questions and give Dr. Akakpo the floor to also address the issue on third termism as it comes to stay in the ECOWAS sub-region.
I want to thank Dr. Aubyn for his brilliant explanation. From what I see so far is the conflict between international treaties and law in terms of local law, state laws. But to push it, he made a very interesting point I wanted to actually highlight. He says that will be difficult to happen in Ghana. Why? Because we have seen certain political culture in a country that predestined not to have that kind of situation. But in different countries, for example, you're talking about Togo. What is the political culture of Togo? What does the constitution say? If they have constitutions, who know about the constitutions? Okay, if you have a constitution, and let me just be blunt, the constitutions is a framework. The interpretation of the constitution is another step to take. Okay, what are the institutions? Are the institutions respected? If they are respected, who actually get the majority voice in those institutions? Those are some several questions. So if we sit here today, after 40 years, 60 years of independence, if we're still talking about a number of terms in office, I'm a little bit turned off. Like I said earlier, the only thing Africans see in terms of democracy is the elections. And we hear saying now government are free to just come out and say, okay, even though this is the end of my term, I'm going to change the constitutions. Okay, let me ask you a question before I keep going. What are the mechanisms of in the constitution? Will the constitution just be changed overnight? Do we just allow the constitution to be changed? I know countries, stable democracies, who has not even changed the constitution since the country was created. But here we are, in African country, they have 5, 6 different constitutions already. I'm looking at the Togo this morning, the term come from 5 years to 7 years, right? And I was wondering, okay, what is the political culture? Because the politics here is not just the government or the state, right? We need to think about the citizens. The citizens have to have a certain position in terms of political matters. So what we're saying is, if we give ECOWAS is trying to, what ECOWAS is trying to do, in my view, is to say that, okay, we have countries that the democratic process needs to be learned. We need to set standards. Maybe that standard will have what we call a certain effort in specific countries. So if we can copy what's going on in Ghana, if Togo can look at what's going on in Ghana, that means we have a certain ripple effect in what's going on in Ghana in Togo. That's what ECOWAS is trying to do. But the problem is, these are the presidents who signed these treaties who actually go against those treaties when it's their turn to change the term. So what I'm trying to say here is, these problems, I don't think it's ECOWAS to solve these problems, but we need to start thinking about what kind of a political culture our country have and how can we actually affect that, just so we know what are the laws and how we respect them.
Thank you. Very, very, very interesting and insightful submission from the panelists. After the next question, I'm about to ask the audience will have an opportunity to also ask their questions. So my question is, you talked about political culture, and I would like to speak about, I would like you to touch briefly on the election observers from ECOWAS. In this time of COVID-19, everyone is a bit hesitant. How effective are the observer missions that are sent from ECOWAS? And how effective are they going to be this year? If Dr. Akakpo, if you could touch on it briefly for me. Sir.
Yeah, you saw me smiling now because I think the question is not good, but it's because I think this is a very, very good question. One thing that I observed by studying Africa is that forgive me, I'm an African and I'm going to have to be very, very frank with my people. Do we have an election to actually respect the Constitution, or we have an election to please international donors? Right. That's something I wanted to do. So if we send observers to the country, what is the role of the observers? Are they going to come back to tell ECOWAS, yes, the country is doing good, or this is very bad? So the observer will go, right, and they come and will write their report. What is that going to give us? What is the impact of that report? I've seen several countries that observers goes and the report they have pull out of what they have seen is totally different from the reality on the floor. So yes, the observer role is very important to have observers, but somehow I feel like our elections are hijacked to begin with. It's not for local that we have an election. We have an election to please international donors because they force us to have a democracy. So we're having this election to please them. So the outcome is not to please our citizens, but to please international donors. So the role of these observers, sometimes I feel like their feedback does not reflect the reality on the ground.
Thank you, Dr. Akakpo. You caught me midstream. Dr. Aubyn, could you also touch briefly on the question, sir?
Okay. We want to assess the impact of observers, ECOWAS observers, for example, in these elections. So the question that I want to ask is that, are they doing anything different from what they've done in the past? If not, then I don't see any significant changes in terms of whatever impacts they've made previously and now. But generally, international observers imbue the electoral process with integrity. I mean, their presence is supposed to help ensure the transparency, the freeness and fairness of elections. But what has been the history of observers in Africa? Like Marc talked about, you have observation report that talks about the election has been free, fair, and peaceful. And sometimes when you are on ground and you hear such reports, you ask yourself whether these people were actually on ground or they just sat in the capital cities listening to radio stations and wrote their report, or they went to places where there were no violence. You know, because when they are deploying, they also select places where their safety will not be jeopardized and all that. You know, so has elections been free and fair in Africa? Has any election? And for me, I always hold the view that there's no election in Africa that is ever free and fair. You know, so, and the observers, for political expediency and also sometimes to maintain the status quo, they take certain positions which we all accept as a norm. But really, what impact do observer missions have on our elections in terms of the roles that observers are supposed to do? Our elections free and fair and transparent as observers are supposed to imbue the process with, you know. So for me, that is where I look at the issue from.
Yes, I want to add something to Dr. Aubyn's point, if you allow me. Yes, I agree with Dr. Aubyn's point on election has never been free and fair. But I want to point out something, and that goes back again to my idea of a political culture. First of all, how many African let's talk about Togo. How many people live in Togo without an ID to be able to vote? Right? That's the fundamental questions. Meaning that all the elections in the country are problematic if actually half of the population can even participate. So we don't have a political participation to begin with. And second, the political system is such where, well, forgive me if I say, we're still playing in the case of Togo in terms of North and South. So it's not even the election is fair or free. The question is that even election? Election is supposed to be a partial. Election is supposed to be open, and citizens should have the right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akakpo. That is indeed an interesting question. Is that even an election? But please, if you can, the participants on the call, we just put up a message. If you'd like to ask a question, you can use the raise button option. I will invite you to ask a question. You can also put your question in the chat box, and then I will read it out for you. But before we take the questions, if I don't have any questions yet, we are streaming on Facebook. So if you have any friend who wants to join but does not have Zoom, the person can go to the Institute's Facebook, that's GHI, Institute of International Affairs Ghana, and check it out. A quick question about is it even an election? So I saw in the news today that the opposition parties in Tanzania are banding together to ask for a look into the election. They are questioning the free and fairness of the election. And the opposition parties in the Ivory Coast are calling for a boycott of the elections. Exactly. I ask this, is that a sign of a democracy on the rise or in decline on the African continent? Can you hear me, please? Dr. Aubyn?
Is it Dr. Aubyn? Okay.
Dr. Aubyn, please, did you catch the question there? Okay, let me take it again, please. So I am asking that in Tanzania, the opposition parties have banded together and are asking for a review of the election, questioning the credibility of the election. In the Ivory Coast, the opposition parties are boycotting the election or calling for a boycott of the election. In Malawi, the judges have asked for a rerun of an election that happened last year. My question is this a sign of democracy's growth on the continent or a regression of democracy on the continent, please? Okay, certainly it's a regression. It's a regression, or it's a downward trend of democracy within the African continent. You know, since the 1990s, when a lot of countries became democratized within the continent, it's been almost 2 decades now. And one would have thought that by this time, a lot of countries would be consolidating their democracy. But we are still struggling with some of the initial challenges that we had when we moved from autocratic regimes to democratic and multi-party forms of government. And for countries that have practiced democracy for over 2 decades or close to 2 decades and still struggling with some of these issues about opposition, boycotting elections and all that, I mean, you can't describe that democracy as growing. It is retrogressing, you know, and it doesn't also bode well
for the democratic consolidation of the continent and also of those countries. Because by now, some of us will want to see elections being seen as a means to an end. But we continue to see elections as an end in itself, which also leads to the kind of challenges that we face with elections. So it's a sign of a downward trend of democracy within the continent.
Dr. Aubyn, Dr. Akakpo, can you touch briefly?
Yeah, that's a very
from the chat.
That's a very good point Dr. Aubyn just made. So I'm going to repeat one of his questions. If the opposition said that we're gonna boycott the election, would that mean that the president who is going to be elected from that elections is not their president? Is not the president of the country? Right? That's the fundamental question. Boycotting elections is you refusing to your people, to people who align to your political party, the human right of a political participation. Voting is not just because I belong to a party, but because as a citizen, I want my voice to be heard. So I don't see why a political party will call his members and say, boycott the election. The president is going to be elected and that president is going to make a decision that's going to affect your life. This is what I tell my students in the classroom. If you say you don't like politics, let me be the bearer of bad news to you. Politics likes you because every single part of your life is political. The tax you pay is a politics. The road you drive on is politics. The hospital you go to is politics. The school you go to is politics. So it's better to get involved and fight the fight instead of stay on the bench and say, I'm not going to fight. I hope my point is clear.
Yes, Dr. Akakpo is very, very clear. I would hold off on any follow-up questions and take a question from Dr. Olatunde Adebayo. I'm sorry if I butcher your name. And his question is, I think this is to Dr. Akakpo. What are your views on the Togolese election? What does the future hold? And also, is the new female prime minister a game changer or not? Dr. Akakpo.
Unfortunately, it's been 20 years that I was involved in Togolese politics. Maybe Dr. Aubyn is too close to answer that question, but as I say earlier, if I can actually say anything at all, is that Togo is not a democracy. It's better if we just proclaim the country a monarchy, because for what's going on, yeah, they might have been in power for years, and when he died, his son took over the power, and he's changing the constitution to stay in power. I don't see the future. And forgive me, as a political scientist, I'm saying this from a neutral part, as what I study international system, I study US. As a matter of fact, I teach US politics at the university. So what I see, if I compare that to Togo, the nomination of a prime minister, young or old, is just a display. It doesn't change anything about the politics. I don't even know how much power the prime minister has. So even though, well, I say in the beginning, I'm not too close to Togo. It's been a long time that I'm involved in politics in Togo. But what I can see from distance is that it's not going anywhere, and it's, like Dr. Aubyn said, is actually a backward movement.
Dr. Aubyn, I think Dr. Akakpo has put you on the spot. He says you are closer to the action, and you can give us an answer to Dr. Olatunde's question. Is the female prime minister in Togo a game changer?
I mean, I think Marc, Dr. Akakpo, responded to that, despite the caveat that he gave. I mean, if you look at Togo's political history, then you could say that, to have a female as a prime minister, at least we've given the gender card by allowing a woman to hold that high office. But the question also is that, what kind of power does she have? And what kind of control does the president have over her? Mm-hmm. Whether she could take independent decisions without interferences from the president. And for me, that is a question that is very critical, because you see, government do appointments and they appoint people for several reasons. Maybe for their image, maybe to entice development partners, because now development partners are stressing a lot on gender, promoting women and whatever. So they could put the person there, but the person will have no power to do what he wants to do. I mean, if you look at countries like Mali and the other places, you could see how powerless the prime ministers are. So for me, it's good for the image of the country, but it doesn't change anything internally, because the president still controls the affairs of the country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aubyn. I think the phenomenon you touched on is tokenism. And here I'll throw in an interesting fact. I would also share the graph with that. So the two top contenders in all the 6 ECOWAS, please go to the last slide if you can see my screen, please. The top contenders in the ECOWAS elections, the top 2 are all male. There is no woman contender in any of the elections that are happening in ECOWAS. Then I'll throw in an interesting fact. The median age of the contenders is 66 years old. And yet the median age for the population hovers around 18 and 19 years old. The country with the oldest median population is Ghana with 22 years. So it is interesting that you brought up the phenomenon of tokenism. In the course of the discussion, I'm sure we'll go back to it. But I have a question from Ms. Minta. If I could see the question, please. And her question has to do with she says, thank you for this interesting discussion. Dr. Akakpo, you mentioned the US election in the beginning. Can you please comment on some similarities and differences between the upcoming US election and the elections in West African countries? So I think this is very direct to Dr. Akakpo, if you could address that for me, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's exciting to say that today in the US, our elections have become a fearful thing. We have a president in office that have a different position in international, in politics, and that becomes so challenging. So is there any similarity we can, or any differences we can see? Yes, at least I can say as someone who study US politics is that the respect of institution is the foundation of our democracy in the US. In West Africa, I'm going to go again and be blunt about it. There is no respect for institutions. Just like Dr. Aubyn said, the institutions are created to please donors. The institutions are not functioning. So the first problem of a bad governance in Africa is that not only we lack institutions, but the one we created do not function. But I can say, as I get a phone call, I get text message, my student worried, what is going to be the end of this election in the US? I tell them, go back to our constitution. We respect in the US the institutions. So I'm going to keep having a faith in institution we have for the last 233 years. But now, when you go to African country, Dr. Aubyn said, since 1960, we have independence. In the 90s, everybody thought democracy is in Africa. But now we have to ask that question. Is there a democracy? Or we just create a system to please the international system? Now, we create a system to please donors, but on the ground has nothing to do with our culture or our political culture. As a matter of fact, I'm going to push the question and say, do we have a political culture in an African country? I am afraid to say no. So the similarity here, or differences is, in the US, no matter what the challenge is, our institutions, they're going to play their role. But in an African country, I don't think so. Thank you very much for that question.
Dr. Aubyn, the next question is from Moses. And his question is a bit long, so please bear with me. And he says that if elections are not free and fair, and several members of the population do not even have ID cards to vote or are not fully educated to be informed voters, then should there be a different form of choosing/electing politicians, such as allowing politicians like Kagame to continue ruling if they are at least perceived to be doing this right thing for their countries?
Good question.
Okay. I think so. Why don't we rather look at it from improving the system? Because it's a defect of the system. So why don't we look at improving the system, building the institutions, strengthening the institutions? Because like Marc rightly pointed out, if you compare the institutions in Africa with that of the US and other European countries like the Norway, Sweden, Finland, and all that, you see that the institutions are working, and governments are very responsive to the people. So why don't we rather look at ways to improve the system instead of having an alternative, which could also lead to the same problems that we have? Because there's no guarantee that the alternative is better than what you have now.
What you have right now. So
look at how we build it. We build the institutions to allow the system to be free and fair. We often mention Kagame and all that. I was in Rwanda some time back. We went for an event where the Rwandans were telling us about their success story. We had different ministers who were giving us what they are doing in the various sectors. So I remember asking a question that since we came for 3 days, you are telling us only about the good side about Rwanda. But the other bad side, negative side that we can learn lessons from. Why are you hiding that one and telling us the good side about Rwanda? And that is the image they project out there. And everybody talking about Rwanda, whatever, but we forget about the other aspect of Rwanda. All right. The point I'm trying to talk about is that there are defects in every system that you see. So we need to rather look at how we strengthen the system, how we build the systems so that they can serve the interests of the common good and not the interests of only certain groups of people within society.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aubyn. We are really hard pressed for time, so I'll take the last question from the audience and then I'll jump into my very last question. And this question is from Miss Atabi Diakon, who is sorry, one question, 1 second. Yes, the question is from Atabi Diakon, who is sorry, not Mr. His question is, do international observers go easy on African elections? So if you could briefly, I know we've discussed this at length, but if you could just briefly touch on it, Dr. Aubyn. Do international observers go easy on African elections?
I don't get the question well. What does he mean by go easy?
They don't tell the truth.
If you can expatiate on that, then I can give you.
I think Dr. Akakpo has captured it by saying that they don't tell the truth. So they are very easy.
Okay.
They don't do.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Aubyn, please.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, you see, all these things are part of the international politics. All right. And you need to appreciate international politics to be able to appreciate the role that some of these observers from European Union, Qatar Center, whatever, do on the African continent. Because there are times international actors want to push a particular agenda, all right? And their report will reflect that agenda, okay, despite the realities on ground. All right, so you need to understand the international politics and dynamics and how they reflect in the report of these international observers. There are times that they want particular leaders to be in power. And so the report, the observational report, will reflect that. There are times they want leaders to be out of power, and they'll give reports that makes the leader evil in the eyes of the international community. And you could see some of those reports in a number, of countries based on the report from these observer mission. When there are even acts of violence and all that, they will tell you that it was free, fair, and transparent, because they want to push a particular agenda.
Interesting, insightful submission about the geopolitics and how that affects the reportage from elections. I will throw the last question from the audience to Dr. Akakpo, and this is from Mr. Simon Yikwe, who's a student at Webster University. I'm sure you know Webster University because you yourself are a student at Webster. And his question is, if the median age of all these presidents are 60 plus, are the youth not being cut out from politics in Africa? And will this lead to more NSAS issues across the continent?
That's a very, very good question, because even in the US, we have that challenge. Our politicians to get to the presidential campaign, beside Clinton, Obama, and Kennedy, they are over there, right? But the question is, I think I will turn my colleague, big up to Webster University. The question is, does institution reflect our people, right? Does the institution we created in our country, or even politics, reflect our people? What is unfortunate mostly in African countries, and you say in the beginning, we have the youngest population in the world. But then when it comes to politics, most young people in Africa are not very involved. Even if they want to be involved, they don't have the means to reach to the point where they can run for president. I think in a practical way, that's how I look like it. So somehow, yes, we can have a youth populations, but most of the time we use them to get a vote, but we never give them the way to actually get involved really in politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Akakpo. Unfortunately, as is the case with all very interesting conversations, before we realized the time was almost up, or it just past time, and I would like to apologize. I wanted to really stick to my time, but the convo is going so well. I would like to pose my last question to my panelists, and that would be, what in your estimation are the possible implications of the ECOWAS elections of 2020, i.e. the elections of Guinea, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Niger, Ghana, and Togo? What are the possible implications? So I'll jump off with Dr. Aubyn.
Okay. I think some of the implications are already happening. Because after the Guinean election, we saw a lot of violence and also humanitarian consequences. There are people who are moving to Liberia, all right, who are crossing the border in Liberia. Even in Ghana, in the western part of Ghana, we've seen people from Cote d'Ivoire coming to Ghana because they don't know what will happen with today's election. So you can talk about the humanitarian consequences that will emanate from all these elections, because there may not be full-blown conflicts, but there will certainly be isolated cases of violence in certain places, all right? In Cote d'Ivoire, for example, I hold the view that the situation we had in 2011 and 2012 is not the same. In 2011, the country was divided between the North and South. The North controlled by a rebel group and the South controlled by the government. That's not the situation we find today. But the issues that will come up may cause humanitarian consequences, displacement, and refugee situation in that will spill over to other countries as well. The influx of arms, small arms and light weapons, has also been a major challenge. And with all these elections going on, we see the proliferation of arms across countries, which also has repercussions for the sub-region in terms of the future development of the region. And then also the issue of terrorism and violent extremism. You see, the outcomes of those elections will dictate how terrorism, violent extremism will evolve within the sub-region in the coming years. Because any violence or any widespread situations could allow these terror groups to take advantage of it and make the situation worse in those countries. So we need to also look at that side as well when it comes to elections within the sub-region. And then my last point, has to do with, we've already spoken about the COVID situation and how it will also become a challenge within the sub-region. Because as movements are taking place, it also comes with these health issues, all right, across borders and all that. So we need to look at all these situations.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aubyn. Dr. Akakpo, unfortunately, I know I said this will be the last question, but the audience is very active and they have a few questions that I'll put in. So Dr. Akakpo, if you can just touch on the implications of the ECOWAS elections, then we just take the last two questions from the audience.
Yes, I'm going to be quick because Dr. Aubyn has said a lot of stuff I want to say. But the things I want to point out today is that we no longer live in 1960, we no longer live in 1970, we no longer live in 1990, we're in 2020, where new media, social media, Facebook, Instagram, the information are circulating quickly, right? I'm in the US, but I have seen how many Ivory Coast people have been killed during this, the process to going to the elections. So the spillover effect, the simple fact that ethnic groups cross borders in Western Africa call on ECOWAS to actually step up his game. Countries, in my view, this is my humble view, countries in West Africa, they don't have a state. They have a government, yes, but states don't exist. Politicians hijack the political systems. The economy doesn't exist. People have no right to do whatever. They violate people's human rights every single day. ECOWAS has a role here to play to try to avoid the spillover of a bad election. Just like you say, in the west of Ghana, Ivory Coast people are pouring in the east of Ghana, Togolese people are going to pour it in when it's a problem in Togo. So because of new media, because of things that are changing, because of cross-border, because of ethnic groups, I think ECOWAS now need to know that if there should be a peace in this region, they have a role to play. I'm going to keep it simple. Thank you.
Thank you very much. ECOWAS needs to step up their game.
Yes.
That's according to Dr. Jean-Marc Akakpo. I'll take two questions. One question from Mr. Zygmunt Schmidt. Apologies if I do not get your name right. His question is, should the EU be more interested in ensuring free and fair elections in Africa? What is the impact of elections in Europe, and why should Europe care? So any one of my panelists can definitely attack this question for me, please. Okay, Dr. Aubyn.
Sorry, I was not paying attention. Can you come again?
Yes, please, I can. Mr. Schmidt's question is that why or should the EU be more interested in ensuring free and fair elections in Africa? And what are the impact of African elections on Europe? And why should Europe care about these elections?
Oh, of course, they have to care because we live in a globalized world. Okay, first of all, we have EU companies from the EU that are working in Africa, in West Africa. When there's violence, it will impact on their economies because the foreign exchange from their multinational companies here will not go to their countries. So it will affect them indirectly. All right, if you go to the Francophone countries, you see a lot of French-owned companies that operate in those regions. And any violence there will have impacts on the economy of Paris or in France. So they need to be bothered about what happens within the continent. Secondly, Africa is the closest neighbor to the EU. Whatever happens here, especially in the Sahel region, will cause migration to Europe. You saw what happened in 2016, 15, and 18, the European migrant crisis caused by situations in the Middle East and North Africa. So they have to be interested because whenever there's violence here, people will definitely cross to Europe. And that also has implications for their own security and all that. So for the sake of their investment, their multinational companies, and even their own citizens, or their EU citizens also in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Guinea, and all those places, the safety of their people alone, they have to be interested in what happens here because of all these interests. And also, lastly, for the public good or the international good, because most of the EU countries are also part of the UN Security Council, like France, UK, and all that. And as part of the conditions of being a permanent member, you need to be seen as being responsible, all right, in terms of how you deal with global issues. So to promote the international public good, it's also important that the EU takes interest within what happens in Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Aubyn. I'll pass on the last question, and it is an interesting point you raised about migration, about the potential of unstable elections unstable elections in Africa causing an increase or a spike in the number of persons that try and cross the Mediterranean into Europe. I think that's, for me, is a key reason why the EU should be interested in ensuring that free and fair elections take place, especially in the ECOWAS sub-region.
I have a quick point I want to add to Dr. Aubyn.
Sorry, my apologies.
Dr. Aubyn polished this out for you very well, but I'm going to put it in a very blunt way. The first one is the economic reason, just like he said. The African market represents, I don't know what percentage for European countries. And second one is the political reasons, the geopolitics. Most of African countries, most of West African countries still are a puppet of a European country like France and England, right? And also, there's a strategic problem in terms of geopolitics, right? And also social problem, just like Dr. Aubyn put it, the immigrations, right? And we have a lot of European in Africa, we have a lot of African people in Europe. So with those 4 points, and I said this several times, I'm questioning the independence of African country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akakpo. I think those are very strong points of opinions from yourself and Dr. Aubyn. And then I'll take the very last question from Atabedi Kodum Jr. Once again, apologies if I do not get your name right. And his question is, international election observers aim to detect and deter electoral fraud and build public confidence in the election process. This makes credibility a valuable commodity and explains why international election observers take pains to present themselves as objective and impartial actors. For example, in 2017, they cautiously endorsed Kenya's contentious elections, but the country's Supreme Court then invalidated the presidential poll on the basis that it had not been sufficiently transparent or verifiable. I think maybe he wanted to make a comment, maybe he wanted to expand on his initial question of the election observers. Thank you very much, Atabedi Akukodum Jr. on that point. I do not have the question. So I think that will be all from the Q&A session. So thank you very, very much to my panelists. Unfortunately, we are 16 minutes above our threshold. I know you have busy schedules. Thank you for coming. And thank you to the audience for joining us. And this webinar has been recorded and it will be shared on the Institute's, that's the GHIA.org social media pages. And also, please join us at our next session, which will be on the 27th of November. And if my panel would indulge me, I will gladly have them back with other panelists where we discuss the past elections, the fallout, the not fallout, and also we project into the 2021 cycle and put Ghana's election into perspective. So thank you all for coming. It's been a very, very wonderful, wonderful session. Please, can we all put on our videos now so we can take a group picture? This is the new normal. If we were in one place, we'll take a group photo together. So this is our chance for me to take a picture with Dr. Jean-Marc and Dr. Aubyn. So if you can all put on our videos, if the host, the producer could just ask everyone to put on their videos and we can take a quick picture. We'll wait a few more seconds for the others to kindly put on their videos, and then we can take the quick picture to commemorate the insightful and impactful conversations that we've had today. Okay, finally, thank you all for coming. Please check out the Institute's website, that is GHIA.org, for the recorded session for this event. And you'll also please check out our website for our upcoming events. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and also do shoot us an email telling us what you think about the event, possible ideas and topics for an event. We are welcoming any feedback. Thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.